Welcome to the second week of Unstoppable. In every video session, you're going to start off your time with an icebreaker question. The reason we start off with these light-hearted questions is to welcome and warm up the conversation among the group. In other words, it's used to break the ice that typically limits the interactions of people in a group. Under the icebreaker question, there is a section called What to Expect. Once you are done with your icebreaker, go ahead and have someone read that section aloud. Now go ahead and hit pause. Have someone read aloud the icebreaker question and have everyone share their responses. Then read through the What to Expect section. When you're all done, you can hit play and we'll continue. I hope you enjoyed that icebreaker. We're going to move right into our video teaching for today. So make sure you have something to write with and you can take notes on the following page. Last week, we heard Pastor Gene Apple talk about the life of Joseph. This week, we'll hear the rest of the message, but we'll also show a short portion that we viewed last week. So those that are joining your group for the first time this week will understand the rest of the message. Let's get started.
Genesis chapter 37, verse 36 says, "Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph to Potiphar." Notice that name, one of Pharaoh's officials. Pharaoh is the head of Egypt. Potiphar is the captain of the guard. Now, as captain of the guard, Potiphar would have been the chief executioner for Pharaoh. Now, here's another note. If you're ever sold as a slave, you don't want to be sold to the guy who wears the black hood and is known as Dr. Death, okay? But that's the household that he's working in. But just as you would hope, you say, oh, things will get better for him. Just as you would hope, things do start to get better for Joseph. And Potiphar starts to notice what a young man of high character he is and what a great work ethic he has. And so Potiphar puts Joseph in charge of his entire household while he kind of semi-retires and goes work on his golf game or something like that. And you would think after everything Joseph had endured that this is kind of the end of the story now. And the Bible would say, and God blessed Joseph and he lived happily ever after. But then the story of Joseph kind of takes a Real Housewives of Beverly Hills left turn. Genesis chapter 39 verses 6 and 7 says, "Now Joseph was well-built and handsome." The original Hebrew of that language means that he was well-built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph, this well-built and handsome young man, and said to him, "Come to bed with me." Now, no doubt, because of Potiphar's position, he is married to a beautiful trophy wife, right? And this cougar takes notice of Joseph, this young, well-built, ripped young man, and she makes her move on him. And I need to tell you that in the Hebrew, this phrase right here is very crass. This is not like, hey, baby, what's your sign or something like this. This is just kind of like she is saying, come to bed, let's just do the nasty, okay? And it's even more vulgar than that in the original language. And if you think of Joseph as some like sanitized saint of God who's not even tempted by her seduction, you've got him all wrong. Of course he's attracted to her. Of course he wants to throw caution to the wind and jump between the sheets with her. I mean, this woman has nothing to do all day on her to-do list, but dedicate herself to her appearance. Her day is full of aerobic class, of personal training and massage with her personal trainer Sven, and then she gets, pedicure, manicure, hair extensions, highlights, spray painted at the tanning bed or something like that. I mean, she just looks good all the time. This is lady hotness right here. And Joseph says, though, how could I do such a thing? How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Notice he doesn't say, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against my boss? I couldn't do that to him. He doesn't say, how could I do such a thing and because I'm saving myself for marriage? He says, no, how could I do this and sin against God because I want my life to be holy. I want to honor God with my life. Quite a young man. I've noticed when many of us were going through a season of adversity, sometimes we use that adversity as kind of a permission slip to say, hey, I think it's okay to go ahead and dishonor God a little bit here. Sin against God here. A woman, a wife, can't remember the last time she felt loved, she felt treasured, she felt valued by her husband. And so she justifies in her mind, responding to the little flirtations at work or hooking up on Facebook with an old high school flame. A husband begins to feel like intimacy in the marriage is just another to-do list on his wife's chores between doing the dishes and doing the laundry, and he feels undervalued. And so he justifies watching porn because, after all, he has needs. But Joseph says, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against my God? Well, Mrs. Potiphar is relentless, and she keeps making, this wasn't a one-time pass, she keeps making passes at him day after day after day after day, till one day she can't stand it anymore, and she grabs his coat, and she says, come to bed with me, and he is so alarmed by that, he runs away, and she's clutching onto his coat, and he runs right out of his coat, out of the house, in his boxer shorts or something like that. Now think about this. This is the second coat he's lost now. He has a hard time holding on to his coats. And as he runs away from Mrs. Potiphar, she starts to cry, rape, rape, that young man tried to rape me. And by the time Mr. Potiphar gets home, she's all geared up for an Oscar-winning performance. She's got the trembling lip thing going on. She's got the tears coming down her face. She's probably torn some of her clothes, messed up her hair. Think about this. Joseph, in this channel of adversity, he does the right thing. He doesn't sin against God. But Mrs. Potiphar cries rape. And as a result, he's thrown in prison for 10 years. He's gone from wearing the beautiful coat as the favorite son to wearing an orange jumpsuit in the dungeon of a prison. 2 years go by for Joseph in this prison. And then Pharaoh, who leads the country, has a dream about some skinny cows. I don't know if they were skinny cows like this or not. But Pharaoh has a dream about some skinny cows who ate some fat cows, and some skinny ears of grain that eat some fat ears of grain. And all of a sudden, the cupbearer of Pharaoh, who knew Joseph from prison days, goes, oh, wait a minute, I know a guy who does dreams. I know a guy who interprets dreams. And so he goes and he fetches Joseph, and Joseph comes to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And Joseph says, well, here's the meaning of your dream. The skinny cows eating the fatter cows mean that we are going to have 7 years of plenty, 7 years of great harvest in this land, followed by 7 years of great famine. And if you don't prepare during the times of great harvest, you're not going to be prepared for when the 7 years of famine come. And before you know it, Pharaoh says, wow, you are the man, Joseph. And he makes him the vice president of Egypt. He puts him as the second person in charge of the most powerful country in the world. He's the second most powerful man in the world. Genesis chapter 41, beginning in verse 41 says, so Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He says, I'm going to make this official. And he dressed him in robes of fine linen. Don't miss this. Joseph gets his coat back. He loses his first coat when his brothers take it. He loses his second coat when he runs out of Potiphar's wife, while she's clutching it. But he finally gets his coat back right here. And Joseph oversees Egypt through the time of famine. But not only Egypt, all the outlying countries through the time of famine, where his lousy brothers live. And they head down to Egypt, because they hear that there was someone in Egypt who was wise enough to prepare for the time of famine. Now, don't you love this? Think about this whole setup on this. 2 years into the famine, his brothers show up in Egypt and walk right in front of the vice president of Egypt. And they don't recognize Joseph. They don't know it's him. Maybe he's got the eyeliner thing going on. He's aged. He was 17 when they sold him as a slave. He's 39 years old now. And guess what they did? They bowed down. Do you think a little bell was going off in Joseph's head? He's kind of looking at him. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All of a sudden, Joseph realized, that's my brothers. That's the one who sold me. Let me ask you, what do you do in a moment like that if you're Joseph? I'm saying, let's kill him. Right? That's what I would do. I mean, who could blame him after what they had done? But eventually there's that moment where Joseph lets his brothers know who they are. He says, guys, it's me. Maybe he wipes off the eyeliner or something. Guys, it's me. And you know what they do? It's like Home Alone. They think he's going to kill us. Joseph asked everyone to leave his presence except his brothers. And he weeps so loud that all the Egyptians could hear him. And he calls his brothers close and he says, I am your brother Joseph. I am the one you sold into Egypt. Don't be afraid. Don't be stressed out. Because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. And Joseph forgives his brothers. Make a long story short, he has his father and all of his brothers and a younger brother, Benjamin, all come to live with him. And years later, in Genesis 50, Joseph is speaking to his brothers one day about their past and all they had been through. And they're still feeling guilty about all they had done. And then he gives them this perspective about it. Genesis 50, verse 20, he says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Notice that. You intended it to harm me, but God intended it for a greater purpose. You intended it for evil, but God intended it for good. You meant it to get rid of me. God meant it to put me in a position to feed you and to feed the rest of the world. Isn't this a great story right here? Now, the great question you have when you're in that channel of adversity and you can't see any way out, you can't see the better fishing on the other side, the great question that you have in that moment is, where is God? Where is God right now? Interestingly, a funny thing, the Bible says no less than 3 times that when people looked at Joseph going through this channel of adversity, they would say, wow, God is with him. For instance, when Joseph was sold to Potiphar, the Bible says the Lord was with Joseph. When Joseph went to prison because of the false accusations, the Bible says, but while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. When he was stuck in the prison and elevated to a place because he was so responsible, the guards put him in charge over the prison. It says, because the Lord was with Joseph. Over and over and over again, the Bible says the Lord was with Joseph. Let me tell you something. When you're hurting, when you're disappointed, when you're broken, when you've had the wind knocked out of you, when you're in that channel of adversity, God is with you. You are never alone.
Wasn't that great? After each video teaching, you'll be going through the discussion questions in your guide based on the video teaching we just watched. This is really going to be the meat of your small group because it's where you get to talk amongst yourselves, share your takeaways, learn from each other, and encourage one another. At this time, you can turn off your DVD and begin answering your discussion questions. We will see you next week for session 3 of our Unstoppable Small Group Study.